Hey yo, what's good? So in this month's Ring magazine, they wrote a great article. It's by Dr. Randy Roberts, and it's called "Fighting to the Finish," and it talks about the longest boxing match in history. And this fight, as you can see on the screen, and it says right here that the fight, it went for 7 hours and 20 minutes and 110 rounds. And this fight took place April 6th, 1893 in New Orleans. And it's funny because a lot of people like to talk about the athleticism and the science of today's fighters. But I ask, which fighter today do you think could go 110 rounds? And for anybody that stepped foot in the ring, we know that it's one of the most tiring actions that we could do, period. Just shadowboxing around the ring is tiring. That's tiring as hell. So imagine 110 rounds. I'll set the stage a bit. Andy Bowen was from New Orleans, and he was a everyday man. He was a laborer. He was what the newspaper described as a mulatto. That means he was part black and part white. So really, back in those times, they had labels as octoroon, quadroon, and this is all in the Ring magazine article, guys. Quintaroon, which the label was, how black are you? That was what the label meant. Mulatto just means that he was part black and white. But not Andy Bowen. Oh yeah, it is Andy Bowen. It's Andy Bowen. He was a mulatto. He was a laborer. He worked in the cotton fields, in the cotton yards, it says here. He unloaded banana boats. And he worked in the metal shops. So he was a hard laborer. He loved the sport of boxing, though. And being from New Orleans at the time was the Sin City of back in the day. Anything goes. And for any of us that have read a little bit of boxing history back in the day, it was kind of complicated. It was outlawed in a lot of areas, but they still had it. It was an underground sport, but it was still portrayed in the newspapers, in the media. So it was out there, but really it was an underground sport that wasn't supposed to be out there. But New Orleans openly had it. New Orleans accepted it. New Orleans embraced boxing as a sport, as a culture. And in 1892, they had what they called the Pugilistic Carnival, which was 3 days of boxing. And it was I believe it was in the Olympic. It was in the Olympic Stadium as well. And during that time, the news covered that event more than the presidential election, which was between Benjamin Harrison and Grover Cleveland. Imagine that, boxing getting more coverage than the presidential elections. The event was topped off by John L. Sullivan versus John Gentleman Jim Jeffries and James J. Jeffries, Gentleman Jim Jeffries. And I'm not going to say we all know, but what happened was James Jeffries beat the living hell out of Sullivan, and he became the new heavyweight champion. And they saw that boxing could become could become a commercial enterprise is how he puts it, and that they could make money. They made $50,000, all expenses aside. You know, they made $50,000. So they're like, we could make money off this. So they got the local Andy Bowen, who was loved by the people because he had amazing stamina and he had amazing heart. But he did have a lack of skill, but he made up for that in his heart and stamina. So April 6th, 1893, Bowen had trained hard for this because this fight was the fight to the finish. The fights that he loved to fight because that's what he was known for, fighting to the finish. So this fight started real quick with Bowen bull rushing Burke, hitting him to the body and the head. And Burke, already by round 2, it says that Texas Jack Burke is what they called him. Texas, his torso was red and swollen already. So from rounds 1 through round 30, it was a hugging fest. Jack Burke did not want to let go of Bowen, a fear of getting knocked out. And in round 30, Bowen knocks down Burke, but Burke gets saved by the bell. By rounds 51, the referee, John Duffy, notices that Burke's forearms and wrist are twice the size that they should be. They were swollen like a mother. But he told the referee, and he says, if Bowen whipped me, it was all right. He told him that he did not want to give up. And they were 3-minute rounds. The fight, it was 3 a.m., rounds 89th, and everybody knew that Burke had two broken wrists. He had 2 broken wrists by this time. And that's why both men were exhausted. Jack Burke had broken wrists. There was very little action in this fight so far. And throughout the whole fight, there was very little action because Burke's holding and his refusal to hit after he broke both of his wrists. I don't blame him. And Bowen couldn't throw because he was exhausted by that point. So it comes to rounds 101. Round 101, they had already broken the record for the longest fight. The longest fight had been 6 hours, had been 100 rounds, 6 hours and 39 minutes, and it was between Dan Needham and Patsy Kerrigan in San Francisco in 1890. And the longest bare knuckle fight was 6 hours and 15 minutes, and that was in Australia. So this fight had already been longer. It was already the longest fight in existence. And come round 108, the referee is like, man, people are leaving. The sun is already coming up for the next day, guys. The sun is already coming up for the next day. Round 108, the referee is like, hey man, you got 2 more rounds, and if you don't end this, I will end this. So it's 110 rounds. They don't knock each other out. The referee stops the fight. Burks has broken wrists, swollen ribs, puffy eyes, puffy ears. Bowen, did I say? No, I said Burke. Burke was completely clean. He's like, I feel like I fell in the beginning of the fight. Unfortunately, the rules said if there was a no decision verdict, because the referee declared a no decision, neither fighter would get their purse. So they basically fought for free, 110 rounds, and they received no money. But the promoters, I believe they felt bad. They said that they gave 110 rounds. So they got their purse of $2,500. They split it and gave it to both fighters evenly. So for 110 rounds, Andy Bowen and Jack Burke received, how much is it? They received $1,250 each for 110 round fight. 7 hours and 20 minutes of work. Man. So Andy Bowen was really never the same after that. He kind of lost his heart. He did have another marathon fight, which was 85 rounds, and that was in 1894, with 85 rounds against Jack Everhart, and he won that fight. But his next fight was against George Kid Levine, who was a lot more skilled. And he was a great lightweight fighter. And going into the fight, they knew that he would be overmatched because Andy Bowen was raw. He was very raw, got by stamina and his heart. But he couldn't do it with this fight. Both fighters got a $3,000 purse. But George Kid Levine, he was too skilled. He feinted a right hand and then he threw an elbow. It was around round 18. So he only lasted around 18 rounds against George Kid Levine. He feinted a right, threw an elbow, and then threw another right hand to the jaw. And Andy Bowen lay unconscious. He fell to the canvas. The canvas had no padding, no nothing. He hit his head. People thought he had broken his neck. But they sent him home, and I'm just checking for facts, but they sent him home with his wife, and he later died. He died from that fight, from George Kid Levine. So this legend from New Orleans died, I believe, the way that all great fighters, great warriors would like to die, not from something that happened inside the ring, something that they loved. Because even though Bowen had a job, he was a laborer, he loved boxing. He did it for the love, not for the money. He did it for the love, and it became tragic later on. So Andy Bowen, the hero from New Orleans, died with basically prize fighting in New Orleans because they brought in a bunch of new laws and they sort of outlawed boxing in the city. And then so boxing was never the same in New Orleans after Andy Bowen versus Jack Burke, because always after a death or something tragic happened in boxing, there was always these people, sometimes religious, sometimes not, clamoring to outlaw boxing. And that's sort of what happened in New Orleans at that time. But for now, we have this longest fight in boxing history. It's a marvel to hear about. Because even though this fight was uneventful, this fight was boring, it's historic. And I can't say any fighter today, even if they're clinching, even if they're trying to make the most boring fight possible, could fight for 7 hours and 20 minutes. Thank you everybody for watching, and you guys have a great day.